Alright, what we're going to do here is take a look at a brand new setting inside of Camera Raw, inside of Photoshop CS3. It's a setting called Recovery, and it actually helps us. It's nice because it does a lot more in Camera Raw. It makes Camera Raw more of a full-featured area to work in, so you wind up having to do less later on. Well, right now I've got a photo selected in Bridge, and I'm just going to go to the File menu, go down to Open in Camera Raw, and that'll open up that photo inside of the Camera Raw dialog. Now, if I go over to the Basic panel here and I go down under Exposure, I can see the new setting here. It's called Recovery, and it works out well because it's in the order that you'd use it. I'd use Exposure first, and then I'd use Recovery. So let's actually work on this photo, and as I'm going along, I'll kind of give you my thought process as to how I would use this Recovery setting in conjunction with Exposure. So first I would adjust the exposure of the photo, and you can see as I move it to the left I can make it darker. Then we move it to the we move it to the right and it makes it lighter. But what's going to happen is you'll start to turn areas of the photo white because this exposure setting is a lot like the white slider is inside the levels dialog. It's kind of your white point. That's what you're doing, is you're pushing things toward white. What you don't want to do is push areas with detail in them toward white. I'm okay if this background goes white because it probably is supposed to be white. But I don't want the area like the flower here and some of her skin, I don't want that to go white. And the way you can help this is by turning on the highlight clipping warning. That's in the top right here. And now what that does is it makes the photo look really bad. But it's not anything permanent to your photo. It's just showing you, highlighting in red, what areas of the photo have become all white. And when I say all white, I mean there's no detail now in those areas. So what you would do is you would play with your exposure setting. You see that's getting a lot of white on her face and in the flowers. So I would pull back and I try to get rid of that. But the problem with this is when you pull back on exposure, you're making a global change to the photo. I'm making the whole photo darker, when really I kind of like the exposure at this point. I think all of the main features are pretty well exposed here. I'm just not crazy about these highlight areas you can see in the flower, up on the face here, so I might pull it back just a little bit. Alright, but I don't want to pull it back all the way to get rid of them. So that's where recovery comes in, because it probably should really be called highlight recovery. And what it does is it recovers the detail in your highlights. So I would take this recovery slider and watch this. So instead of pulling back on exposure, which is a global change, I'll take the recovery slider and watch the red areas in her face. Watch it in the flowers too, okay? I'll start moving it. Look at that. They're gone. Alright, so what we did here is we recovered the detail in those highlights. And what I want you to realize is, look at the overall photo. I'll go back to the way it was. And I'm going to turn off this highlight recovery because you know that those red areas go away now. And now I'm just going to slide it. And you barely see a change. Alright, it changed a little bit. That was before. And this is after. It's a little bit of a change, but it's nothing that major, alright? As opposed to an exposure change. Here's the exposure. Okay, that's a pretty big change. Alright, that was before, that's after. So you can see that the photo changes pretty drastically, but this recovery slider barely changes the photo. So before the recovery slider, really your only course of action when you were adjusting exposure to get rid of those blown out highlights was to drop the exposure down. Drop the whole photo's exposure down. Now you've got a better option. Now you've got the recovery slider, and with that you can go in there and you can just recover the detail in those extreme highlight areas, and you can preserve that detail so it doesn't turn all white.